You want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
You can't handle the truth!
Well, we're giving you the Michigan Sports Truth, the show that detects, exposes, and reveals actual and hidden facts, truth, research, and statistics about all the Detroit and Michigan sports teams that the mainstream media doesn't want you to know, whether fans like it or not. No junk, no entertainment, no homerism, no coddling, no pop culture, no opinions, no shilling, and no fluff. Head over to our website at michigansportstruth.weebly.com, follow us on Twitter at Michigan_truth, and like our Facebook page, The Michigan Sports Truth. Also listen to us on Spreaker, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts via iTunes. The Michigan Sports Truth podcast does not represent or defame any of the teams it covers. It only detects, exposes, and reveals honest, actual, and hidden truth, facts, and statistics about them.
And welcome to episode 323 of the Weekend Review edition of the Michigan Sports Truth podcast. I'm Taylor Phillips, along with BuckGeno on Facebook Messenger. Follow me on Twitter at DT2Phillips personally. Also follow BuckGeno personally on Twitter at BuckGenoIII. Got a lot to talk about in terms of the Red Wings, Pistons, and Tigers. Let's start with and we got two segments to do, and we'll do them both along the way. Let's start with the Red Wings first. They signed 6th overall draft pick of 2018 right winger Filip Zadina to a 3-year entry-level contract. And it goes, and according to Craig Custance of The Athletic on Twitter at Craig Custance, he was on loan to Halifax, so he can play in the NHL if necessary. So,
well, yeah, I mean, you look at this signing and Joe, that when he was signed to the Canadian Hockey League, or Major Junior, as you will, for the Halifax Mooseheads, the NHL ruled that the language specifically said, or at least construed, that he was being loaned from his Czechoslovakian club. So a loan is different than being signed to a junior contract. And basically this becomes a matter of parsing words and allowing the Detroit Red Wings now, if they choose to, let Filip Zadina start the campaign in the AHL with Grand Rapids, and they're not penalized for that. If he had been signed by Halifax as an actual junior player instead of being on loan, he would not have been eligible to do so due to the agreement that the NHL has with the major junior clubs. Typically what happens in that situation is that they can play up to 10 games, and then they have to be reassigned to their junior club, or they have to be brought on board fully to the NHL club. They can't be sent down to the AHL after that point. They can either go back to their junior clubs, or they can go for the rest of the year in the NHL. So the teams get a little bit of a test drive, and they can see what they want to, or more likely what they'll do is they'll play them for the 9 games that are allowed before they get to that magical 10th game, and then they'll go ahead and let them go back to junior, so they get a free trial run without losing any service time or burning a year of an entry-level contract. So if Zadina is indeed assigned to Grand Rapids, his entry-level contract actually slides back a year because of that, and it allows Detroit some flexibility coming out of camp. So if they decide to put Zadina in Grand Rapids, which I don't think they'd be working this hard to be able to legally put him there if they didn't plan on that. And I know that Ken Howland has said that he expects the young guys to compete and all these other things, but they were very interested in the wording and the NHL ruling on that wording as to Zadina's status. And so it's a big win for the Red Wings organization in the fact that they do not have to bring him out of the AHL roster right away. They can let him play in the AHL, which frankly is probably a better spot for him, because in junior leagues, that's a completely different game than you're going to see at the AHL or NHL level. It's going to allow him some major ice time, because the Griffins, even though they've had some success in the past year, are kind of in a little bit of a rebuild as far as the roster is concerned. And also, if he impresses enough in camp and becomes one of the 12 best forwards, which I think is an outside shot now because they can put him in Grand Rapids. If they do that, they have options. They can waive Luke Witkowski and or Martin Burke and let them clear waivers and then hide those salaries in the minors if they choose to do that. Or they can bring him up and try to work a trade with somebody. There's a lot of different options for Filip Zadina, but I think this is a win overall for the Detroit Red Wings simply because they now have some flexibility. Because I don't know if he would have had to go back to juniors or if he would have been forced to go back to juniors, if he would have been able to stay with the big club. Now that they have that flexibility, I could see him playing some time in the AHL, and if he proves to be as good of a prospect as people think he's going to be, being moved up relatively early in the campaign and spending the rest of the time with the big club, but it allows them to put off that decision for down the road rather than having to make it right out of training camp. So that said, I kind of wish that part of me wishes that Ken Holland would have had his hands tied by the NHL, but obviously the folks that make those rulings probably have a little bit of respect for the Red Wings organization, and they think this is the best thing for them. They want to rule in favor of them, and there's not a lot of teams that are going to make a big stink about it, because when you draft a guy 6th overall, the thought is that he should be playing for your team. If you're that bad, you can't be picking and choosing which guys necessarily that you get to put on the NHL roster. But in Detroit's case, they're able to do that now, and so we'll see what happens with Filip Zadina. But they'll be able to kind of shift his entry-level contract, give him some team control, and hopefully he doesn't spend a whole lot of time in Grand Rapids, just enough time for me to watch him a couple times, and then head on out to Detroit and begin his NHL career.
Yeah, and before we sum it up, we're going to get to our first edition of our What's Your Grade segment.
Pencils down, everyone. It's time to find out what's your grade
On the Filip Zadina signing.
Well, I think this is going to be, the signing itself is an A, because obviously you don't want to get into a contract stalemate with your first-round pick. The NHL is becoming more and more kind of like the NFL, where there's slots. So if a guy's going first, he's going to get X amount. If a guy's going second, he's going to get Y amount, and so on and so forth. The NHL has very strict caps on entry-level contracts, so it's really hard to do anything with those as far as giving them signing bonuses and whatnot. If you're looking at the overall situation, I'm going to say that him being able to go to Grand Rapids is probably, at least for the Red Wings, more advantageous. So that decision, I would say, grades out as an A-, because now instead of sending him to Halifax or being forced to keep him on the team, they can park him in Grand Rapids for a little bit. Like I said, if he starts to show there that he is ready for NHL competition, they should be ready to move him up, and they have options where they can waive guys like Luke Witkowski or Martin Burke, who are currently on the roster under contract, and chances are people aren't going to be picking that up, even though they're relatively cheap, and if they clear waivers, they can be reassigned to Grand Rapids, and those salaries can go away and be hid in the minors.
Yep, and for all the signed contracts and salaries of all the players of all the teams and whatnot, all that kind of information is on SpotTrack.com and the SpotTrack app. Download it on the Apple App Store and the Droid App Store as well, the Android App Store as well. But that being said, to sum it all up, that kind of has a little something to do with Ken Holland continuing to block prospects and younger players from making the team by spending more of Chris Ilitch's payroll money, signing contracts for Mike Green, Thomas Vanek, and Jonathan Bernier, which will make Ilitch sell the team along with the Tigers. Not to mention the re-signing of Andreas Athanasiou to a 2-year, $6 million deal. But we'll grade that next after we talk about how Holland's expensive contract signing continues to waste more of Chris Ilitch's money, and thus might make the progress of Chris Ilitch having to be forced to sell the team even a little bit faster.
Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, anytime that you're looking at spending money for guys like Filip Zadina, like guys that are on the roster, like Luke Witkowski and Martin Ferg, that are going to play a prominent role, it all adds up. And we'll get into that a little bit here with the Henrik Zetterberg and Andreas Athanasiou talks. But, yeah, if you just look at Ken Holland, obviously trying desperately to show that he's engaging in some sort of rebuild while at the same time stringing the defense that he's done for so long, which is saying they want to remain competitive. They wanted to remain competitive last year, and they stunk. They wanted to remain competitive the year before that, and they weren't very good. So the remain competitive thing is kind of a smokescreen, because I think that's something that he kind of codes with, please don't fire me, I'm trying to do the best I can. So when he says we're going to try to remain competitive, as a GM, you can't just outright come out and say, we're going to stink, we're going to try to get as many low draft picks as we can here for a while, and we're going to really try to bolster us up and try to make another run here. You wouldn't be able to say that. Now, you can say that in different ways without actually saying it with those exact words, but Ken Holland has chosen many times, and this is what I've picked up on after reading many, many quotes from him, remains competitive. To me, it just sounds like he's telling Chris Ilitch that all the money that you're spending because I'm doing all these moves is going to be rewarded in some way by us trying to be a competitive club. When in reality, like I said, last year they were trying to be competitive and they weren't very good. I don't imagine they're going to be much better this year. They could get worse. They might be a little bit better. Excuse me, just depending on who's playing up at the big club. Do they bring a lot of young guys up? Because if they bring a lot of the young guys up, that's definitely going to weigh their record down, because you have guys learning at the NHL level on the job, and that typically doesn't go very well. They don't have a strong defense. Their goaltending is suspect, and their forwards are going to be relatively young, even though when you look at their average age right now, they're the oldest team as far as their roster goes, their active roster in the NHL. So a rebuild typically means you try to make that number go down. Ken Holland with these signings has made that number stay level or go up. So we'll see where they're at there in the time that it takes for training camp to break and see who's actually on the roster.
Yeah. And that said, that leads us to the re-signing of Andreas Athanasiou to a 2-year, $6 million deal, which we're going to grade right about now after I play this again.
Pencils down, everyone. It's time to find out what's your grade.
What it does for Detroit is, number one, it locks up a guy for 2 years that they apparently want on the team. And if they don't want him on the team, it's a pretty tradable contract. It's a bridge deal. You don't have a lot involved. He had a real mild signing bonus that isn't apparently hitting against the cap for some reason. That's something that didn't make sense, but all in all, it's a decent signing for both sides. Athanasiou gets a raise. If Detroit figures that they don't want him on the team, not only is it going to be easy to trade him from a talent standpoint, but from a contract standpoint as well. I mean, if they could deal Tomas Tatar away after signing him to a 5.3 average value contract, you would think that they could trade Andreas Athanasiou with a 2-year, $6 million deal. So, there's a lot of people that still think that Andreas Athanasiou could be traded, perhaps to make room for a guy like Filip Zadina, or perhaps just to get him off the roster because of the friction that's been there since his time in Detroit. Regardless, I think it's a pretty good signing for Detroit because of those reasons that I just mentioned. So not a bad move for them because even if he does stay in Detroit for the length of the contract, then, like I said, it's a bridge deal, kind of a proving ground for him now the next 2 years. If he can impress the coaching staff enough and get out there and produce the points that he is capable of doing, then maybe he'll be rewarded at the end of his contract.
Right. So you're great on the Athanasiou re-signing.
My grade on that's an A-. The only reason I'm not going to give it a full A is because I think they probably, in retrospect, probably overspent a little bit. I think they probably could have gotten away with signing him for $2.5 per $3 million is a decent number. So it tells me that they realize he has some talent, but at the same time, he's still under team control. He's arbitration. He skips arbitration, which leads me to believe that I think the Red Wings, when they talked to Andreas Athanasiou's camp, they try to find a spot in the middle because Andreas Athanasiou probably thinks he's worth more. Red Wings would like to pay less. But I think for Andreas Athanasiou, just the body of work, when you go to the arbitrator, they're going to look at everything. So I don't know if he could have gotten $3 million from the arbitrator, just based on his production and the fact that, yes, you can point to metrics and say, had he played this many minutes, he would have scored this many goals, and yada, yada, yada. But, he's still a middle six forward on a bad team. And the going rate for that probably isn't $3 million a year for a kid that's arbitration eligible. He's only been with the big club for 1.5 years. It's really hard to say that he's worth $3 million from an arbitrator standpoint, not from mine personally, but if I'm an arbitrator, I'm looking at it and going, gee, I don't know if he's worth $3 million a year because there's other guys that are just as good or better than him. Take a guy like Jonathan Marchessault down in Florida. That guy didn't even make $1 million last year. He scored a ton of goals. So it goes in both sides. I mean, obviously there's guys that get overpaid that don't do a whole hell of a lot either. But
by the way, Marchessault's back now in Las Vegas. Now in Vegas with the Golden Knights.
Right. And, you just look at his contract and say, boy, Andreas Athanasiou didn't put up that many goals. And John Marchessault, I think, made $750,000 or $785,000 or something like that last year. So if I'm the arbitrator, if I'm the Detroit Red Wings, I'm pointing at that guy and saying, why am I going to pay him $3 million when I can get a better level of production from a guy who's not even making $1 million? So I think they came to an amicable agreement with the $3 million, but it seems a little bit high, actually. Again, playing devil's advocate, I think that they've screwed around with him enough personally, and I think the Red Wings have mishandled his development. But when you look at it from a neutral point of view, that's where I'm getting the A- from, because that's a nice hefty bag of cash for a guy who, again, can be compared with other players age-wise and production-wise that are making less.
Right. So that being said, I would grade Athanasiou's re-signing pretty close to an A-, but I'm going to go with a B+ because, again, the only thing that hinders that from making any kind of A grade is the expensive Ken Holland signings. A $6 million deal is a little bit above the average that Andreas Athanasiou collects as a whole in an entire contract, not by year, but as a whole in an entire contract. But that being said, we'll get to more what's your grade events along the way as we go along. But the Henrik Zetterberg story being put on about him being put on long-term injury reserve by Jeff Moss of the Detroit Sports Rag, the DSR exclusive from last week. I did a special report on that, and it hit 52 listeners here on Spreaker, and I could not be any more prouder of myself and of Jeff Moss, of course. It's a blockbuster hit with a lot of legitimate details. He's got a back injury. He doesn't plan on playing. He has no intention of playing. He might be done. And we're going to get to 5 questions. The first 2 of the 5 questions first. But, Buck, I want to hear your analogy on Zetterberg being put on LTIR.
Well, I mean, it's becoming more and more apparent, not just from Jeff Moss, but other reports that are saying that he's in danger of missing the season, that he's got some back issues, that the Detroit Red Wings might put him on long-term injured reserve, that he might retire. All of these things could happen. He could retire, but I think the Red Wings would rather just have him go on long-term injured reserve. Obviously, they don't have to pay a capture penalty on that. They can just put him in Franzenland where his salary does not count against the cap, but it gets paid out. That would be something with an injury settlement or some sort of insurance payment. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but for the intents and purposes of the cap, it won't count. So that'll give them some extra flexibility down the road to sign other free agents. They have Larkin and Mantha deal. They need to be able to do that. That would help them with those. They have other guys. I mean, as far as signing that could benefit from that. What would really benefit, though, is it would open up another roster spot on the top 12 for the forwards. So we talked about Filip Zadina early. If Zetterberg's not playing, you're down a center. And a guy like Michael Rasmussen, who was their 2017 first-round draft pick, he's also looking to edge his way into the Red Wings lineup. And they need centers. Henrik Zetterberg was their top center last year. He played a lot of minutes. And I'm not going to go into all of the personnel usage and everything else with Jeff Blashill, but I find it strange that a guy that had back problems was getting over 20 minutes tonight. So, that said, you have Zetterberg if he actually can't play. If he's not right now medically cleared to play, according to Jeff Moss. And that's something that hasn't been confirmed yet, but if he's not medically cleared by the doctor, then he can't play. I mean, there's just not a way that they can shove him out there because the NHL is going to require him to go ahead and get cleared. So if they put him on long-term injured reserve, it's going to open up a roster spot and give him some more cap room. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to make him probably need a new captain. You have guys like Nicholas Kronwall, who's in the last year of his deal. You have guys that have longer deals that have been signed with a team like Darren Helmreich or Justin Abdelkader. So when you're talking about who the next captain is going to be, there's a lot of different ways that they could go about it. But the main drive here is that Henrik Zetterberg, more than not, is being reported that he probably won't play this season. It remains to be seen because until they actually hit the ice, we don't know. My take on it is that if he's not medically cleared in the next 3 months, he's probably not going to get any farther with medical clearance because if he's got a bad back, those are really tough to overcome, especially for athletes that are playing professional sports because, I mean, if you hurt your back, it's hard for you to go to work. And just imagine those guys with the physical pounding, the trouble, everything else. It's really difficult for somebody with a bad back to be effective. And if he can't go, that's going to create a lot of different situations within the Red Wings roster and camp that are going to open up some opportunities for other guys and also allow them some flexibility in the cap. So it bears monitoring, but like I said, it's not just one person. There's a lot of people now trailing on the story that Zetterberg very well could go to long-term injury reserve if he's not able to get that back problem cleared up by camp.
Right. So only the DSR would confirm that so early. Which leads us to our opening of the 5 questions segment.
It's time for 5 questions on the Michigan Sports Truth.
Question number 1. Who could be the next Red Wings captain after Zetterberg retires?
Well, I just mentioned 3 guys. One of them, Nicholas Kronwall, as I mentioned, this is probably his last season. He's 37, going into the last year of his long deal that he signed a long time ago. He could be kind of a bridge captain that would be sufficient, just simply because of his relationship with Zetterberg, his tenure on the team. He's been the assistant captain. Those more of a permanent move and kind of move on to the next generation, so to speak. That's where it gets a little bit more difficult. As I mentioned, you have guys like Darren Helm and Justin Ablocator that have got long-term deals that are going to almost ensure them being in town for a while. The question is, do either of those guys have the qualities? Do they want to do it? That's where the mystery comes in. Now, you're not required to necessarily name a permanent team captain, but a lot of teams don't take out or go away from that option, I should say, because they want to know who the captain is and who's the leader in the locker room. I'm thinking if Zetterberg does end up going on long-term injured reserve and not playing this year, my guess is that Nicholas Cronwall will take the captaincy for 1 year, and then they can kick that can down the road, just like Ken Holland does with everything else, and Jeff Blashill. They don't have to decide right now. They'll just give it to Cronwall, let him make his final spin, kind of a Victor Martinez type of victory lap, and then after the season ends, he can retire after his deal expires, and then they can give it to somebody who's a little bit more permanent. Maybe somebody shows a little bit of maybe the interest, or maybe they show a little bit of deservedness towards that honor during the season. It'd be interesting to monitor who they think would be the captain after that. But like I said, my guess is Cronwall for 1 year, and then they make that bigger decision next year.
Which leads us to
Next question.
Question number 2. Does Henrik Zetterberg's absence due to injury open another roster spot? Like you pointed out, Michael Rasmussen could be in the opening, could be the next guy, the next young guy up to the NHL, but does it open it for him, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it opens the spot. It just depends on who it's for. The question really is who's that spot going to be for? Is it going to be for another free agent signing? It's going to be tough to do with the way the cap rules are. You basically have to sign it after the season started, and Zetterberg went then on LTIR for his official visit. Until then, you have to be cap compliant. So in that case, you're going to be pretty slim pickings as far as the free agent market goes at that point. So you're probably thinking about bringing somebody up that's already in the organization. Is that going to be a Michael Rasmussen? Is that going to be a Filip Zadina that gets to sneak into the opening day or opening night roster because Zetterberg's not there? I think it opens more opportunity up, obviously, for young players. It's going to be very difficult to sign somebody and then basically waive them if Zetterberg decides that he wants to play or try to play. So my guess is that it's going to be a younger player. I can't tell you right now who it's going to be, but my guess is probably narrowed down to Rasmussen and Zadina because those are the two most logical that would fit in that spot as Zetterberg can't return.
All right. So, looks like we've run out of things to talk about in terms of the Red Wings. Now it's time to transition to the Pistons.
Left sideline, bring the answer.
The Pistons signed Golden State Warriors center Zaza Pachulia to a 1-year, $2.4 million contract, and they waive Eric Moreland. That is confirmed by the club. Now, Pachulia may be the 4th dirtiest player in the NBA, according to one of the fans on Twitter, but he's still an upgrade, evidently, over Eric Moreland, and that's why they chose Zaza Pachulia over Eric Moreland. And that's a big signing. They have a backup center behind Andre Drummond.
Right. Well, they needed somebody who had some athletic ability, but was also confident on the offensive end. Eric Moreland was not that guy. Eric Moreland was strictly a defensive-minded player who wasn't given much offensive opportunity, and his role was significantly reduced after the Blake Griffin trade. So it made sense for them to get rid of him. But signing Pachulia in his stead, I like the move simply because, like I said, it gives them some more flexibility offensively. He's up there in age. He's a veteran, but he knows the game. He's competent, like I said, on the offensive end. It's hard to look at his stats for Golden State because, he's one of the last guys off the bench there. So it's hard to say that he didn't thrive in Golden State because he was basically the third center. He did average just over 5 points and just under 5 rebounds a game last year, and that's what you're asking for out of a backup center. Be decent on the defensive end, because that's what you're being brought in for, is to give the starting center a rest. And number two, just be confident on the defense or the offensive end. And I think that's where Moreland really lost his playing time. It wasn't his defensive play; it was his offensive. He just vanished. He didn't have offensive play. He just vanished. So you're basically playing 4.5 on 5 on your offensive end when he's in the game. And for a team that is low on talent, when you're like the Pistons are, you can't afford that. So adding Pachuli is a decent move. Obviously, it's not some earth-shattering mega max deal for 7 years or anything else like that. But Zaza's a veteran. He's been with good teams. There's some people that have said that he's kind of a dirty player. Last year during the playoffs, he injured Kawhi Leonard. He also tried to get under Russell Westbrook in the regular season last year, and so they didn't like that. Neither one of those players liked his moves there, but ultimately, Pachuli wasn't disciplined for either incident, and so it's kind of a play-on attitude. Again, as a backup center, he's not going to be seeing the court a lot. But it remains to be seen if he's going to be kind of a hatchet man or if he's just going to provide some rest for Andre Drummond and give the Pistons a little bit more flexibility when it comes to the lineup.
That's true. That said, that brings us another segment of What's Your Grade? Hold on.
Pencils down, everyone. It's time to find out what's your grade
on that Pachulia signing. What's your grade, Buck?
I give this one a solid B. It's a 1-year deal for a guy who, like I said, he's a little bit up there in age. His rookie year, astonishingly enough, was 2003 and 2004 with the Magic. So he's been at it now for at least 14 seasons. This will be his 15th in the league. And, so you got a guy with a lot of miles on him. He's only 34 age-wise, but he's been in the league for now. It'll be 15 years. And a guy that, he is what he is. He doesn't score a ton of points for you. Like I said, he's relatively mobile. He's not the greatest defender, but he's not the worst. And if you look at his numbers over the past couple of years, you can kind of get skewed because he's playing with a team that's pretty good. He's with the Golden State Warriors, but even if you go back a couple more years, when he was with Dallas for that 1 year, and then Milwaukee the year before that, he can shoot the free throw line relatively well. He's got a career percentage of 75%. He'll grab you a couple of boards. He'll shoot you, a couple of mid-range jumpers. He has no long game, no three-point game, virtually at all. Has actually never hit a three-pointer in his career, so he's not a guy that's going to stretch the floor in that way. But as I mentioned, he's a backup, and he has been doing that role for quite some time. He's been getting pretty decent minutes the last 4 or 5 years. He went to Golden State, and obviously his minutes got clipped a little bit, but when you're on Golden State, that's what's going to happen. But he was regularly 20 minutes a night for the last 5 seasons before he got to Golden State, which means that he still had gas in the tank. So that's why I'm going to give it a B, because Golden State didn't need to use him as much, but when they did, he fit in relatively well. And I think that Dwayne Casey will enjoy having him as a veteran presence and somebody that can, again, he's been there. He can tell you his stories in the trenches and really help out the young guys. And it's not a bad signing at all. And for the money, like I said, the Pistons were kind of strapped as far as what they could and couldn't do. So $2.4 million is a pretty good number for a guy that is going to play about 65, 70 games and get you about 10 to 15 minutes a night.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are really good numbers right there. So, the Pistons hired Gregg Polinsky before that, a few days beforehand, from the Brookly Nets as Director of Player Personnel, according to Adrian Wojnarowski on Twitter at WojESPN, ESPN senior NBA writer, NBA analyst. Now, Polinsky and the new GM, Ed Stefanski, also the senior advisor, have worked together for the Brookly Nets, and now they're going to work together again for the Detroit Pistons. Your say on that?
Well, when they originally hired Ed Stefanski as a quote-unquote senior consultant, the thought was that they would hire a general manager. Well, they didn't do that. They just told Ed, you know what, why don't you just take that office too? And so then Stefanski went about the business of running the team as it was his own. He's been a general manager before, mixed success. If you look at his past record, hasn't been the greatest, but at least he's been in the position. And if 2 or 3 teams think you're good enough to be a general manager, typically you have at least a skill set that demonstrates that you're competent at it, or at least can have some good ideas to make it seem like you're competent. So Stefanski now basically starting to fill out his staff, now that he's been kind of thrust into that GM role, getting guys he's familiar with. And this happens all over the league anytime you have movement, whether it be a head coach or general manager. When there's a change, guys bring in their own staff. Why? Because it's their staff. I don't want the guys from before. I want my guys because I'm familiar with how they work, and whether or not you had past success, that's what's going to happen. You're going to bring along your posse, so to speak. So this, to me, just seems like Ed Stefanski doing what he does and all other general managers do when they get hired into a new team, is they start bringing their guys in, and Polinsky is one of those guys.
Yeah, before we grade him as the hiring, I almost forgot about the next 2 questions on Zaza Pachulia and Eric Moreland. So
Next question.
Question number 3: even though Moreland is no longer needed on the Pistons roster, could he still be developed in the NBA anywhere else?
It would be tough. You're replacing a guy who has very limited offensive capability, and there aren't a lot of teams that can use a guy who's distinctly a defensive stopper. And that's why I think that the Pachulia signing was made, is because they wanted a little bit more flexibility on offense while receiving at least a passing grade defense on the other end. So Eric Moreland, it's going to be tough for him. He's going to have to find a spot maybe as a second or third center that when they really want defense, that's why he'll go into the lineup. But as I mentioned before, it's hard with him on the offensive side because you're basically playing with a half a guy. He's not a very gifted offensive player. He's relatively average and predictable. So it's hard for teams to just take him seriously and really concentrate on him. So I'm sure he can find a spot, but it's going to be real tough for him to hang on with anybody for any significant time, simply because, like I said, the offensive side for him is just it's a struggle.
Ed Smith has joined us. Oh, he left. Never mind that. But anyway, let me get to
Next question.
Question number 4: is Zaza Pachulia good defensively?
Well, it's a relative term. If you look at his defensive statistics over the years, like I said, he's not been the main guy for a while on a lot of teams. He's usually been the first guy off the bench for the front line, or at least if he's had to start, he's been doing so in limited roles. His defensive category, like I said, his defensive category stats are that really stands out to me. The one thing I will say is that he's not I wouldn't say he's a great rim protector. When you look at his differential from within 6 feet, so basically his shot within 6 feet versus the guys he's playing against within 6 feet, he's actually got a negative differential. All the other ones he has are positive differentials. So basically, you can bully him in the post. That's what I read out of that statistic. There's not a lot of guys in the Eastern Conference that are going to be able to do that on a consistent basis. There are some teams, obviously, that will be able to do that, but all in all, true centers are kind of phasing their way out right now. And so if you're getting guys that are bullying him and getting him into the paint, that obviously is his weakness, just because of whatever his style of play is, whether it be the fact that he is not good enough to hold guys in, if he's not properly defending. I mean, there's a lot of different things that can happen, but basically inside the paint, inside the semicircle, he's got a negative differential. Everywhere else, he's got a positive differential. So it means that like I said, he's at or above average for most of those categories. So defensively, I think he'd be, just as confident as Eric Moreland was. When it comes to overall stats, Eric Moreland's known more for his defense. Pachuli not as much, but at the same time, we're not asking him to play 20 minutes and guard their best player, their best post player. We're asking him to play 10 to 15 minutes a game, give Drummond a rest, and give them some offensive mobility within the arc. And that's what he's going to be able to do.
Yeah, a little bonus question. Which backup center was better, Zaza Pachulia or Boban Marjanovic before he left for the LA Clippers?
It's too difficult to tell, simply because Marjanovic just didn't get enough time. He wasn't really put in a lot of situations where he could play for extended periods. The few times that he did, he performed relatively well. Pachuli obviously much older than Marjanovic. Marjanovic more size. Defensively, he struggled. His movement's not very good. Marjanovic. So I think that's where the edge for Pachulia comes in. Like I said, he's not great under the basket either, but everywhere else, he's fair to middling. Marjanovic had a real tough time with guys almost all over the defensive end. And like I said, a lot of it had to do with the fact that he was not a very fast lateral movement guy. And in the NBA, if you can't move, it's not going to take long to get scored on. So the better one, I think, is kind of a TBD, but they both have their strengths, both his. And the one thing I'll say is it's much cheaper than Marjanovic. And for a guy that isn't going to play as much, it's usually a benefit when you're not spending money and it's nailed to your bench.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's Pistons talk, and that leaves us with the final of our 5 questions left in our 5 questions segment, but that will have to wait. Actually, we have one more grade to one more event to grade before we shift to Tigers here.
Pencils down, everyone. It's time to find out what's your grade.
And we're going to grade the hiring of Gregg Polinsky from the Brookly Nets as Director of Player Personnel.
Well, as I mentioned, he's Stefanski's guy. That's what's going to happen. So when he was a Director of Player Personnel at the Brookly Nets, people knew him from there. Stefanski's known him for a while, so he's been there before. This is something that Polinsky's a basketball guy. He was a first-day coach, actually head coach at Georgia Southern at the tail end of the 90s, from 95 to 99. Then he joined the Nets as a scout, and then he was named the Director of the Director of Scouting in 2004. And then later on, in 2010, he was named the Director of Player Personnel. So it's a guy, he's been around the game for a very long time. He's seen a lot of solid B because it looks like, as far as his resume goes, when you're with a team for 16 years, even in the NBA, I mean, it's hard to stick with a team for that long as a front office personnel guy. And not to say that he's bad at his job, it's just a lot of times, as I mentioned before, new owners come in, or new general manager comes in, or somebody comes in and says, I want my guys, I don't want you guys, and they have to go look for a job. Well, Gregg Polinsky didn't have that happen, so it gives me some hope that he's looking for some continuity.
So, what's your grade on that one? Did I miss it?
B, yeah, B.
All right. So that's our What's Your Grade segment. And for our audience, if they have a grade for each event, post them in the comment bank in this episode, and please don't go out of line. So that's finally Pistons talk. So let's transition to those terrible, terrible Tigers.
That one is long gone.
Or should I say mediocre. But, yeah, they're 40-52 after getting swept by the Cubs and splitting the 4-game home series against the Texas Rangers, who blanked the Tigers in the finale earlier today, 3-0 at Comerica Park. The Tigers 25-23 at home, 15-29 at home. They're 40-52, third place in the American League Comedy Central Division, 11.5 games back. They are now fourth worst in the American League, 17, I think? 17.5 games back of those wild card spots. So far, so damn far away. And water's already finding its level again, like we mentioned before, week after week after week. Joe Jimenez, they're at Tampa Bay Monday through Wednesday, and then they're at Houston against the Astros at Minute Maid Park, the defending World Series champions. The Houston Astros right now lead the American League West Division at 61-31. They are how many games ahead? 3.5 games ahead of the Seattle Mariners, who are apparently in one of those two wild card spots. They are in the second wild card spot, 3 games back of the Yankees for the first wild card spot. But the Tigers just keep on sliding. Although they won a couple games at home, that they inevitably split that 4-game series, like I predicted once on Periscope, with the Texas Rangers after getting swept by the Cubs. So they're at Tampa Bay. The Rays, only 2 spots back, still 11 games back, along with the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. But the Rays, 45-44, compared to the Angels, 46-45. The Rays are 2 spots back. The Angels are 3 spots back. But the Rays, another team that's better than the Tigers. But of course, the Astros are even way better than the Rays. 61-31, as I mentioned. The Tigers are going to get scorched over there down in Houston and down south of the border.
Well, when you talk about the Houston rotation, it looks like, from what I can tell, they're going to see both Garrett Cole and Justin Verlander on the weekend.
What about Verlander's injury?
Yeah, that's so far, that's what they have as the probables. Garrett Cole, like I mentioned, is an all-star. Justin Verlander is an all-star. It's really going to just depend on, if you're Justin Verlander, when you're talking about his injuries or the fact that he's kind of dinged up, all-star games are typically skipped because of that. If he's got something that's serious, that's something that they can look at and say that he doesn't need to pitch in the All-Star game. But at this point, looks like he's going to keep pitching. And if he doesn't feel well, maybe the Astros call somebody up. But really, it'll be told this weekend, simply because if he doesn't feel he's going to be able to pitch in the All-Star game, he's going to need to let them know as soon as he can, so they can find a replacement. If he is indeed indeed injured. I haven't heard anything. If he is indeed injured, he may very well just not start the last game before the All-Star break. But Garrett Cole, for sure, is going to pitch. And Garrett Cole is also on the All-Star team, so Houston plugging right along. The Tigers are somehow in third place in their own division, simply because Kansas City and Chicago are very bad, and Minnesota is just slightly better. Cleveland's going to run away with that division, so it now becomes a matter of time before the Detroit Tigers start to look at guys who they can trade. They've got 23 days until the deadline. Basically what you're hoping is certain guys get hot or look good for the next 20 to 23 days. You trade them, and you gather more prospects where you fortify the farm system. Maybe get a guy or two that is close to major league ready, depending on who you're trading, but really just start to stock assets for your farm system and player development. So we're getting close to that trading deadline, and guys like Francisco Liriano, I want to say Mike Fiers was on a one-year deal, so he could be somebody that gets traded. Take a look here real quick.
Michael Fulmer's already on the trade market. I also heard from Jason Beck of Tigers.com and MLB.com that Shane Green is going to return from his shoulder inflammation, and he could impact the trade market, meaning he could be a trading chip as well. I don't know what that means, but he's already blown 4 saves total halfway through the season.
I mean, that's just going to be real. Yeah, Fiers is a one-year deal guy too. He's been pitching well, so teams that are in the hunt for any available arms. Shane Green coming back, we'll talk about that in our other segments as well. But Shane Green coming back with from shoulder inflammation, that's a big red flag, especially getting a guy at the trade deadline. He's going to come back and he's going to be able to at least show that he's ready. But boy, when you have that type of problem, that can flare up at virtually any time. And if you're making a trade for him, that's going to be a prohibitive factor in what you think you're going to have to give up to get him. Because I don't need to trade you a bunch of decent pieces for a guy whose arm's going to fall off in August. So, him coming back and impacting the trade market, I think, is going to be a little bit less than what the guys from Detroit say. I'm Jason back from MLB.com. I don't know if Shane Green's going to make that much of a difference in the trade market. It just means one more available arm, but at the same time, coming off an arm injury and an inflamed shoulder, no less, you're going to be real cautious. So if the Tigers can get something for him, great. But I don't think teams are going to be ringing Al Avila's phone off the hook to make offers for him.
Which leads us to our final question.
Next question.
Of 5 questions. Question number 5, should Tigers closing pitcher Shane Green be on the trade market when he returns from his injury? To sum it all up, I would say no. So would you.
Yeah, I don't think he should be. I think he should be. Let me rephrase that. I think he should be. You see what you can get for him. I just don't know if the teams are going to be really interested in stepping up to the plate to get a guy who is coming off a nasty shoulder. And maybe he's not fully healed. Maybe he's trying to come back now to show that he's got some trade value. So all sorts of factors that are weighing in here. But it boils down to the fact that I just don't think he's going to make that much of an impact, if any, at the trade deadline as far as who's getting who.
Right. So that wraps up our 5 questions segment. So to our entire audience, if you want to answer those 5 questions, just replay that segment portion of this episode and answer them the best you can without going out of line. Been a while since I've done a 5-question segment with either you or Ed Smith, speaking of whom. But got another Tigers topic before we close up shop here. Joe Jimenez, speaking of the All-Star Game, was the only Tiger to be selected to the All-Star Game thus far, at least. He's got a K per 9 level of 10.1 and a fielding independent pitching ratio of 2.54. FIP for short, and he's obviously starting to develop a little bit. And not to mention Nick Castellanos was the only other option for Detroit, like you pointed out off the air, but he's still not good enough to replace anyone who would be injured in the near future. And like you also pointed out, all teams must be represented in the All-Star Game. But let me talk about Nick Castellanos before we get back to Jimenez here. Nick Castellanos, his offense, like everyone knows, is explosive. But what fans continue to fail to miss is his lack of defense. His defensive metrics are beyond crap. His defensive WAR is negative 1.4. It was at negative 1.5 at the end of June, and not to mention a couple of other defensive advanced metrics. His defensive runs saved, RDRS, capital R, lowercase DRS, this year thus far is a negative 11, and per year a negative 18. My God.
You are pathetic!
He can't field the ball. That's what they're telling us. And we agree.
Yeah, well, I mean, the statistics don't lie. And like I said many times, you can kind of get lost in advanced statistics, too. Sometimes you can number yourself right out of a good player or a good, at least, situation for a player because the numbers tell you something or they don't tell you something. There is a human element that has to come into play, but when you're talking about Nick Castellanos defensively, you can take all those stats and say he's not very good at defense. You can make a very good case. But the other thing is the eye test. And that's something that people want to try to dismiss, that loves sabermetrics. I'm always in the middle when it comes to advanced statistics because, as I said before, you can talk yourself out of good players or at least good situations for players because all these numbers say this can't happen. And I'm more than the next guy. I'm just as fallible to do something or not do something based on statistics. But the fact remains, when you look at Nick Castellanos, just watching him play right field, he doesn't look natural. And again, he's trying to learn the position, so he has to take that into account. I mean, I'm not saying that I could be out there in Comerica Park tomorrow giving me a glove and I would be as good as him. That's not the case. But what I am saying is that when you look at him compared to even guys that are borderline marginal defensively, he just doesn't look right out there because he takes some bad routes. He made a couple of decent plays this week and this weekend, but when you look at some of the things that he does, some of his great plays are because he takes bad routes and has to recover in such a manner that he has to make a spectacular play, otherwise the ball's going to fall in. So it's just, to me, the defensive WAR is one thing. There's UZR 150. There's all sorts of statistics that people have made or have devised to show effectiveness in certain aspects of the game. But those are all well and good, and they support what we're saying, which is Nick Castellanos is not a very good fielder. But to me, it's just the eye test that he just never looks comfortable out there. It looks like he literally, they picked him out of the stands, he won a raffle, and they told him, hey, you got to go play right field. Here's a glove. And you just figure out how to do it on your own. And that's kind of how he looks. And for a Major League Baseball player, I know that switching positions isn't the easiest thing. Nick Castellanos did get a little work on the other side of left field some time ago when they thought about moving him to the outfield 5 years ago, and thought about doing that permanently before they put him at third base. It's just hard for me to say that Nick Castellanos is a competent fielder, or at least can even be trusted out there for any length of time, because he just isn't a natural outfielder. And the reason he's playing out there is kind of the same reason that Victor Martinez is still in the lineup. You got him on your roster. You got to use him somehow, and you're paying him to do it. Now, Nick Castellanos' bat is far more effective than Victor Martinez, but the principle remains the same. He can't have two DHs, and they can't DH Castellanos because that means Martinez would have to play the field if he wanted to bat, and that ain't going to happen. So Castellanos drew the short end of the stick, and they got to put him out in right field, where they figure he can do the least damage as far as the team is concerned. So that's where he's at. The trade value for him is obviously all in his bat. It's not on his glove. He was not a very good third baseman, fielding-wise. He's not been a good outfielder fielding-wise. He's just not a very good fielder. It doesn't matter where they put him. He's just not a very good fielder. So, that said, his trade value is, like I said, is solely on his bat. There are some National League teams that would probably love to have him, but the downside is going to be that in the National League, you gotta have him play in the field because they don't have a DH.
Right.
And if an American team league team is looking at him, there aren't very many teams that are looking to bring him on that need a DH. They have those guys already. So his fielding really is going to lower and restrict his trade value. I think it's more than what people think is actually happening. If I'm an owner, or if I'm a GM, I should say, and I'm looking at Nick Castellanos, what am I going to give up for him? Well, he's hitting 300 or above. He's got good power numbers, this, that, and the other. All right, well, let's see what happens when he goes on the field. Holy crap. Stop the presses. Yeah, I don't really feel like giving up a whole lot, even though he's got a great bat. I'm not going to watch this guy turn my right field into a circus tent for 9 innings a game. And I know there's a lot of people in the Detroit media or World of Grand Rapids media that think Nick Castellanos' trade value may not get higher than it is. Well, if he could show that he can actually use his glove for something other than tripping over, I think his trade value would go significantly higher. And that's the part that I think that people are missing. Is they look at his bat, they look at all those stats and think, he's doing great. Somebody should pick him up. If I'm a team like Milwaukee or Atlanta or Philadelphia or any of these teams that have had a long playoff drought and are looking to end them this year and they need to add somebody at the deadline to help them do that, Nick Castellanos isn't going to do it for them. Because the guys they got out in right field right now, I am almost positive that every one of those teams I just mentioned has a guy that is significantly better than Nick Castellanos on the field. So I just don't know. I don't really get this whole Nick Castellanos trade value may not be higher. And for them to say they're going to need a good package in return, I just don't think they're going to get it. So even if he is being shopped around, which I'm sure Alabama will take your call on it, but they're going to want something that most teams are probably going to be unwilling to give up to bring him in.
Right. And to sum it all up on the Castellanos Victor Martinez DH summary type of thing, you can only wait until Victor Martinez hangs it up, retires after his contract is up because of his health. Just like Henrik Zetterberg, Victor Martinez may not have any other choice but to retire because of his health. Once his contract.
The other choice is that nobody's going to want to give him any money to be that bad. But you're right. I mean, Nick Castellanos is probably going to be one of the guys that benefits the most from Victor Martinez leaving, because then he can be a DH first baseman. Miguel Cabrera is going to be recovering from a torn bicep tendon. Who knows what that recovery is going to be like? Miguel Cabrera, people forget that he still plays for the Tigers and still has a lot of money owed to him to do so. So he's not going anywhere. But with Victor Martinez gone, you can platoon both Castellanos and Cabrera at first/DH. If you need a left-handed hitter to do that, you can find one that you can plug in on the roster, maybe a utility type guy. That's something that can happen. Other than that, I think that Castellanos would be more than likely to at least get some playing time at first base. He played third base as the corner spot, so he could be relatively competent there. Obviously, third is different than first in many respects, but he at least knows his way around the infield, and at first base, they're not expecting Gold Glove caliber defense. I think that he'd be perfect to go in there and, like I said, platoon with Cabrera, or at least find a way to get into the lineup more often as either a DH or a first baseman, and limit his time out in right field.
Right. So my only other bonus question is there any other American League team that can allow Nick Castellanos to be a designated hitter if the Tigers can't make him a DH?
Well, I think if you are, caliber or that's going to require you to give up that much because you're not in position to win. If you look at the standings in the AL, people that are in playoff races, well, in the West, it's going to be the Mariners. The A's are looking on the outside looking in. They don't really have a whole lot of room. If you look at the American League Central, the Tigers aren't going to give Nick Castellanos to the Cleveland Indians so he can beat their face in 17 times a year. So that won't happen. And then you look at the AL East, you got the Red Sox and the Yankees going neck and neck for first place, racing towards the playoffs. And both of those teams are well stocked in the lineup. They don't need a Nick Castellanos to come in and also be their DH, because if you look at the Red Sox lineup-wise, like I said, they're pretty set. I mean, they've got guys that can DH.
Right, they're elite, so they don't need. They definitely don't need them.
I mean, and the thing is, if you're talking about the Red Sox, they play their home games in Fenway Park, which, if many of you have noticed, Fenway Park's right field is a house of horrors for even the best fielder. Nick Castellanos is not one of those, so I'm not going to be sticking him in left or right field and watching him chase the ball all around the park. So it's very limited as far as where he could go as a DH in the American League. And again, that's going to limit or lower his trade value because there are going to be teams looking to trade a pretty good package for what amounts to be a right-handed hitting designated hitter.
Right. Another bonus question actually is there anybody in Major League Baseball that can develop Nick Castellanos' defense besides the Tigers? I know they're not going to develop his defense, but is there anybody else, any other team in Major League Baseball that can develop his defense?
I'm sure there's such a thing exists. I'm not very familiar with all of the MLB staff members as far as the teams are concerned, but I would imagine they could at least get somebody to teach them how to play in barely above average right field, or at least a barely above average corner infield spot.
Like third base.
I'm not sure who those people are, but I'm sure they exist.
That's fine. Yeah. This is just a trick question just ahead of time. So back to Joe Jimenez a little bit. He was selected again. His K per 9 ratio 10.1, FIP fielding independent pitching level 2.54. Like I stated, he was obviously starting to develop a little bit. He's got 3 saves already this year. He blew a save in Toronto, but he was only getting warmed up. So I would have to believe he's at least decent. That was the only Tiger to be selected in the All-Star game. All teams must be represented in the All-Star game, and the Tigers had Jimenez going to the All-Star game over Castellanos.
Yeah, I think Joe Jimenez is developing nicely.
Yeah.
He's been thrust in the closer's role because Shane Green has a bad shoulder. As you mentioned, he blew a save in Toronto, but overall he's been solid. His K rate's good. His fielding independent pitching, which is basically a measure for your non-stat heads that is geared towards only outcomes that the pitcher can control. It's a pretty convoluted formula. I'm just going to break it down as saying if anybody can help or hurt the pitcher, they try to remove those events, and there's an equation that comes up with fielding independent pitching. You're talking about a 2.54 FIP. That's actually pretty good. When you're talking about in the league, you don't look at just necessarily ERA because that can be tricky, especially for relievers. Fielding independent pitching is a very, very good barometer. I think it's better for relief pitchers, in my opinion, than starting pitchers. Simply because of the smaller sample sizes that those guys have, so they have more control in their hands when they're getting the ball. Whereas starting pitchers that go for 5 or 6 innings, they tend to be at the mercy of their people behind them, and sometimes it can work out great, sometimes it can't. But they also have more opportunities to control themselves and not let the fielders come into it. And so Jimenez fielding independent pitching is at a very good level. He's been okay. Tigers are good. He has to have somebody. So Joe Jimenez got the calls to Nick Castellanos, and I think that's fine.
Yep. It's still okay to have an all-star game, all-star team, any all-star player anyway, even though you suck. So that said, there are some players that can be developed at some point in time, and others that can't, at least in some area. So yeah, that's all Tigers talk, and that is episode 323 of the Week in Review. Buck, Geno, thanks very much for hanging in there. Excellent and outstanding analysis on everything that we talked about here this week. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, thanks.
Yep. And before we sign off, I want to remind everyone to share this episode and the entire podcast on social media and have their friends share that as well, because we want to tell them that the Michigan Sports Truth Podcast is in search of a wider online audience that is fans of sports, especially our teams in the state of Michigan. Tigers, Red Wings, Pistons, for example. So please spread the word about the Michigan Sports Truth Podcast on Spreaker, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts via iTunes. Its Facebook page, the Michigan Sports Truth Podcast, and its Twitter handle and Periscope channel at Michigan_Truth. I'm Taylor Phillips. Follow me on Twitter at DT2Phillips and Buck Geno at BuckGenoIII, 3 I's for Roman numerals. We'll talk to you next week on episode 324 of the Week in Review edition. Thanks very much for listening, downloading, and sharing. TTFN, ta-ta for now.
The Michigan Sports Truth Podcast does not represent or defame any of the teams it covers. It only detects, exposes, and reveals honest, actual, and hidden truth, facts, and statistics about them.
And mission complete.